This is Sarah Stewart Holland.
This is Beth Silvers. You're listening to Flashback 2018, a special episode of Pantsuit Politics. As we think about the 10 years we have been making this podcast, we're revisiting each of those years. It's really been interesting to pull on the threads of things happening today and see where they connect with our recent history. Today we're going to revisit 2018, a year that I found to be the hardest of the last 10. There's so much to discuss here, and we'll dig into all of that in just a moment.
First, we want to make sure you aren't missing anything happening in the expanded Pantsuit Politics universe. For premium members on Substack, we make more episodes. We have a film club. We're in the middle of a 30-day series of meditations leading up to July 4th. We're doing a long read of Habits of the Heart, which I think about constantly as we revisit these last 10 years. We'd love to have you come join the fun. You can search for us on Substack or follow the link in the show notes.
Next up, let's rewind the clock to 2018. Okay, Sarah, I mostly remember therapy from 2018. That's what I remember about 2018.
I mean, I've been putting like a little label for myself on every year. And I did write that 2018 was an emotional year.
Yes.
It felt very emotional.
And I have to be honest that some of it is personal because 2018 is the first year that I did Pantsuit Politics full time. So I quit my full-time job at the end of 2017. The draft of our book was due in February of 2018. So January was like a scramble to get that draft done. I was trying to build a business coaching practice in addition to doing the podcast because I wasn't sure we were going to make enough money for it to work for me to be full-time with the show. So I think that I was just frantic most of the year. Are we going to be financially okay? Am I working hard enough? What does it feel like to do this as a full-time job? Can we get the book written? I was a little bit frantic. And on top of that, the news didn't do us any favors.
Yeah, I was definitely frantic. I've been kind of going through my Facebook post or looking through some of my photo albums for each year. And I was still a city commissioner. I was running for re-election as a city commissioner. I ultimately lost that re-election campaign in November of 2018. And so I just see a lot of hustle. And I remember being on the phone with you always, like I was your free business coaching client, because I was like, why are people acting like this? Why is Miss Fellow Commissioner trying to make my life terrible? Also, like, that's the year they accused me of cheating at the debate. And so it was just so much. And so when I think about that in context of the major news events, then I'm like, okay, well, it makes sense that everything hit me so hard because everything did hit awful hard.
The other thing that I think has to be held alongside all of this as we think about everything hitting us hard is that my kids were 3 and 7. So yours would have been 3, 7, and 9. So we're in it as parents. Right? You got a 3-year-old, you are still really, really in it.
Ugh.
And the kinds of stories that occupied our time on the show were just overwhelming as parents of young children. So I really think of the year as starting in February with the Parkland shootings. You know, we've got the Trump administration happening in the background. We're still figuring out what that means and adjusting to the pace of news. When I went back to listen to some of our episodes, we were always like, well, a lot happened since we were with you last. It's like, that's adorable, guys. It's going to be that way forever now. But, you know, we were like dealing with that pace. And then you have this mass shooting at a scale and just in a way that hit different than some of the other mass shootings have. It was a really hard one to process.
Well, because there was so much video. That's what I remember profoundly from Parkland is that the kids were videoing and that they, you know, that was a moment where a lot of kids had cell phones in schools. Another mass experiment we were running over the course of these 10 years.
Yeah.
And so that's what hit me so hard. I remember thinking, okay, this will do it. Now we can see what the kids see, because we had long conversations about like, people are protected from these shootings. They don't have to see what the first responders see. They don't have to see what the victims see. Can I take us on a tangent for a minute?
Please do. That's been my favorite part of these 10 years.
I feel like these first years have been so predominated by shootings in a way that the last several years have not. And I hesitate to say that out loud in the same way I won't speak to cold and flu season until May. and whether or not I'm surviving it or not, or have escaped any virus. Like, I don't want to speak it out loud. That's not to say that there aren't any mass shootings in America, but it's just hard not to notice a difference as we go back and look at so many very, very headline-grabbing mass shootings in the first years of this podcast, because I don't feel like we've had as many in the last several years.
And those are also some of the hardest things, right? Because we were talking about them all the time.
Yes.
I always have this sense of like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what else to say about this. I've said what I have to say. I don't want to live like this. I don't want anyone else to live like this. Here are some policies that we talk about every damn time this happens. They seem to go somewhere in states, but not at a national level. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, Parkland is one. Legislation came out of Parkland. Florida changed because of Parkland. That's different than the entire country changing. There's always disappointment to be felt if you are part of the gun control movement. But Parkland did make a big difference.
Well, I feel just like the schools have been hardened. I can trace the journey of our school, a particular elementary school. When we started this podcast and Griffin started kindergarten, we walked him in every morning. Anybody could walk in the building. And the school has very much been hardened since then. Like, you can't just walk in. All the doors are locked. You have to be buzzed in at all our schools. So I think some of that has to be a result of the hardening of the schools themselves. And again, I'm not immune to the fact that there are still mass shootings, but it just feels different as we go back and listen to these earlier episodes.
So the other thing that makes me think of Parkland in a different category, maybe a category of its own, is how quickly those students turn to advocacy. Mm-hmm. The social media generation and the savvy that those students had about trying to bring people in and make them feel this experience was very impactful. And, you know, as a mom to two young kids, just thinking about what those kids must have been going through, the way people accused them of being crisis actors, the swirl that surrounded them, not just because of the shooting and the devastation and the trauma they experienced, but then over and over again because of the activism that they jumped into.
Yeah, and I wonder at what cost. For some reason, I looked up X Gonzalez, the student who was known at the time as Emma Gonzalez, and just an enormous amount of mental health burden placed on them and David Hogg, and just the way that people lashed out at them. There was no sense of they are also victims. It was another funhouse mirror of like, it doesn't matter what you're talking about once it gets a partisan wash. That's it. It doesn't. We're done. And we've lived that out in so many ways, including the other, big stories from this year.
So we get to June, and that is when the zero tolerance policy at the southern border goes into effect. And we all start becoming aware of families being separated at the border. We become aware that that is part of the design of the policy because the Trump administration believed that it would deter people from coming to the country. We start arguing online about whether Obama did this too, and is this actually new, and is this actually cruel? And I remember just feeling adrift during this time too. It was the first time, I think, for me as a person who has lived an exceptionally lucky life, it's the first time that I've ever thought, wow, I really do not trust my government right now. And that is a strange feeling.
Yeah, I was very activated. I protested at an ICE center in Southern Illinois. I took a group to Mitch McConnell's office, which you can no longer do, talking if we want to speak to the hardening over the last few years. That's not a thing available to you anymore. But I showed up with a group of women and we just said, like, look, we're here peacefully, but this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. It was so heartbreaking to live in that moment and just think, I have this 3-year-old and they're pulling these babies out of their mother's arms. And we would hear terrible stories of assault and abuse at these centers where the children were, or babies not being cared for. It was awful. And it is a stain. It is a stain on our nation that Stephen Miller, the architect of this policy, is now back at the upper echelons of power. It is a stain. He is a
totally agree.
Evil. I don't use that word lightly, That was an evil policy. He continues to perpetuate evil, dehumanizing policies towards migrants and refugees. That should have been the end of him. It should have been the end of him, this policy. It's one I still think about all the time.
I distinctly remember having lunch with a friend this month. And this is a person who doesn't get very exercised about politics, just not his thing. Definitely not something he gets emotional about. And he brought this up at our lunch and said, you know me. I never protest things. This is not who I am. But I am like vibrating with rage about this and wondering, what are we doing? And how are we going to allow this to go on?
Yeah. Yeah. It was vibrating with rage was the theme for 2018.
So September comes along and we have the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, which we'll talk more about in a second. We'll just give them a little bit more attention. But then in October, it really jumped out at me looking at this list and just thinking about where we are today, that 2018 is the year that the Saudi Arabian government killed Jamal Khashoggi, an American journalist. And talk about stains on our country, the way that we have never demanded any kind of accountability for that, the way that we continue to treat the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, as though he's a great partner. We're all going to get rich together. When our intelligence agencies assess that he probably gave the order to kill this journalist, it's appalling.
Well, all the signs are there of what we're dealing with in a more extreme way in the second Trump administration. You know, the cozying up to Kim Jong-un, the just complete, like, what does that have to do with me when it comes to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi? Even the China trade war that we had also this year, like, it's all there. The treatment of migrants, the, complete inability to actually lead through the country through something like Parkland. Just this... We're all in it for ourselves. That's the message. And at every turn from Donald Trump, we're all on our own. Like, you have to fight for every little piece you want. And maybe I'll fight for you sometimes. Maybe I won't. But this is a dog-eat-dog world. And there are no ideals. And there is no striving to reach our better natures. This is it. We're in the dirt. And we're not trying to aspire to anything. We're just trying to fight and grab for whatever we can get our hands on.
And it's really hard to look back on this and see our stamp of approval on it via reelecting him and so many of the principal architects of the worst of that administration.
I mean, you do have the midterm elections this year where Democrats did win back control of the House of Representatives in a huge, huge, huge gain. I think it was like since the Watergate era. So there's moments where you see the American people are like, I don't like this. I don't want this. And I think, but for COVID, which obviously we're going to get to in a few years, and had it been a direct referendum on some of these policies and the chaos that he had caused over the previous 4 years, who knows? Or if he'd just been reelected. I don't know. The first term, it's so hard to go back and think what could have been different. What could we have saved ourselves from? We don't know what we saved ourselves from taking this path. Something.
Right. So many sliding doors moments. And a big one happened in September as a new Supreme Court justice was confirmed. So we'll talk about that next. Sarah, this is what I really remember working out in therapy. Brett Kavanaugh is nominated to replace Justice Kennedy, which I hadn't thought about in a long time, that's the seat he occupies. I guess that's a good thing. It's not Justice Kennedy's seat. It's just one of the 9. But it did make me feel a little something just thinking about the role that Justice Kennedy played on the court and the way that Justice Kavanaugh likes to pretend that he plays that role sometimes, but then dramatically lurches to the right from that role other times. So I remember sitting with my therapist processing our audience, processing these hearings, because we were just flooded with stories of people being sexually assaulted. This hearing just brought up so much in the people who listen to the show. And it was really an honor to be sort of a repository and sounding board for that. And it also really took a toll.
Yeah, I think one of the exchanges over the last 10 years that will never leave my mind. It's a core memory. It's seared into, every time I think about Pantsuit Politics or every time I think about all the episodes we've recorded is the exchange we had where I said.
So during the Access Hollywood tape, I wrote a blog post. I'm going to read a section of it and I'm definitely going to cry. It says, because when you say boys will be boys, you mean my boys. You're implying that there is something dark and carnal lurking deep inside my little boys. The ones I cuddle and hold tight, the ones who hold my heart in their grubby little hands as they run and jump and smile widely up at me. I love you, Mommy. You're saying that they will grow up and become men and become capable of taking something that does not belong to them, of breaking it, of destroying it. I am capable of accepting a lot of things about motherhood. I am capable of facing the vulnerability inherent in this endeavor. I can face the lack of control. I can face the frustration and the bittersweet grief. I can even face the inherent risk of losing them forever. But I cannot and will not accept that deep in their core lurks a rapist. Of course, there is another underlying presumption, when people say boys will be boys, when you blame the victim for the fact that she was drinking or flirting or being sexual, it's that the boys aren't dark and sinister for taking because you can't take what already belongs to you. I've seen it a million times the men who look at me and comment on how I look or how I walk or how I act, and you can hear it dripping in every word Donald Trump says on that tape. You are here for my enjoyment. You have no value outside of what I assign to you. I laid in my bed and wept because there are the impossible choices available to me as a mother of 3 young boys in 2016. Believe that my children are capable of rapes based solely on their sex, or believe that I have no value because of mine. There is something dark and cruel lurking deep within, but it's not deep within my boys. It's deep within all of us if we continue to support a culture that assumes men are driven to terrible things because they are men, or that women deserve terrible things because they are women. Culture always wins, but culture can change. We can change. And I still feel that way. I still feel like we're facing that's my choice. That's the choice available to me as the mother of boys.
And then you also were so emotional about what this means raising girls. Like that exchange is just, it's core. I feel like it's sort of when we grew up, it's when we turned a corner, whatever metaphor you want to use as podcasters, like having to navigate that moment, even more honestly than the election of 2016, really stands out in my mind.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that this is a pivotal year in so many ways. And what hit me listening back, especially to our September 7th episode from that year, was realizing that I remember the Kavanaugh hearings just through that filter of Christine Blasey Ford's testimony, how everyone was feeling, the fights that you were having with family members. And I had kind of lost that this was also a moment that I think, I don't want to be too dramatic and say this singularly broke the Senate, but it really changed the Senate too. The way that these hearings were conducted, the personal animosity that people felt towards each other on the committee, the way I was saying in this episode, because this was early in the hearings, I really hope that Senator Harris can back up the things that she's laying out in front of Brett Kavanaugh, because these are extremely serious allegations. I hope Senator Booker has the receipts. This is really what built Kamala Harris's profile. So much was contained in this set of hearings. And I do think we're still working out some of the ways that this altered the way folks, especially on the Judiciary Committee, felt about each other. I have thought at so many points over the last 2 years, have we not escalated to the ceiling? Mm-hmm. But no, there are 20 floors above what I thought the ceiling was of escalation.
I think we're falling through. I feel like we're falling down instead of going up. I feel like I can't think the floor is any lower. I can't believe when I think we can't sink lower, we find another basement. Well, I just look back and think that the Democrats were playing by old rules. As much as they were like putting up a fight and coming with their A game as Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, like you're bringing a knife to a gunfight. They're ready to tear it apart. They'd already shown that with the death of Scalia. they're ready to shred it. So playing by the same rules just never was going to work. And I think we've seen that with the Supreme Court over and over and over again. And Kavanaugh was just one more example. Like going back and watching these Supreme Court fights or listening to these Supreme Court fights through the lens of our podcast, like it's, we're all just trying to keep it together. Like you can really hear this Democrats, including us, including me, trying to defend the status quo. I listened back to those Kavanaugh hearings and our analysis around them, and we're trying to find positivity really fast. Like we're trying to get to a place where it's like going to be okay. Instead of in fighting a group that's like, everything's broken, can't you see? So you can't just come with like, Susie Sunshine. We just have to get to the end of this. That's what I feel a lot. Listening back and seeing all these battles is just, and because it's so exhausting to be in an environment with Donald Trump, everybody's just like, well, let's just get through this. Let's just get through this. We'll just get through this one. Then we'll just get through this one. Everything will stabilize. No, baby. No, baby. That's not it. We're not going to get through the midterms and then it'll be okay. We're not going to get through the next election and then it'll be okay. We're not going to get through it's just not, that was never available to us and we could never see it.
I think that's why this year felt harder to me than COVID, because this is the year when that reality sunk in. And I didn't even fully get it. I didn't fully integrate it. But this is the year where it was like, nope, it's not just going to be better next month or tomorrow. Things are not going to calm down. It's not going to get quieter. We're not going to go backwards. This year was just relentless. It was relentless. And so by the time we got to COVID, I feel like I had at least built some muscles for that I didn't have in this year. This is the year where I just felt like I personally came undone in so many ways.
Well, listen, spoiler alert, for 2019, that's when Anne Helen writes the burnout viral article about millennial burnout. So, and it's at the beginning of 2019. So it was all cooking during 2018. But, it's funny. We're saying that and I'm like, but we were recording a series about 9/11 this year, which I'm still really proud of. I thought it was really good work. I really liked that we went to New York City and saw the memorial. And I'm like, we were recording this series about how everything was different and we were never going back. While living through this time and thinking like, no, we'll just get through it and we'll get back to like a stable position. It's like you can't see the forest through the trees. Even when you're recording a series about how things are permanently altered by history.
That pull to the status quo is so strong. They say inertia is the strongest, most powerful force in the universe for a reason. What episode jumped out at you as you were re-listening?
Well, heartbreakingly, this is the year that we recorded an interview with Rachel Held Evans. So listening to that was really intense. I had not listened to it since she passed away. It was also when we had Jen Hatmaker on, which was really, really special. But, beyond our Kavanaugh conversations, I was listening to The Danger of Othering, which is an episode we recorded. And I had this moment where I talk about the resistance to dehumanize. The resistance to dehumanizing even someone as horrendous as Donald Trump, for me, is really, really important because what I've been thinking about a lot, and when I think the conversation with Brené Brown and Carrie's point about the risk of tribalism is you don't need to dehumanize someone to find justice. You just don't. That's not necessary. But you do need to dehumanize someone to be cruel. And that's not my values. And I want to avoid cruelty at all costs. And there's just this sort of, I'm not going to lie and say I don't feel even it's like a little bit of a gendered conversation around this. Like you're not paying close enough attention. You don't care enough. You're not angry enough. No, I'm just not going to dehumanize and other someone in the search for justice because I don't think that's required. And I thought, well, the thread's there. Even as we were struggling against the status quo, the thread to say, like, don't, just stop. But again, there's a part of me that's like, yes, good. We were on the foundation of our values the whole time. And there's a part of me that's like, yeah, but you were bringing a knife to a gunfight. They don't care about dehumanizing you. But I feel like that's the journey of these last 10 years is saying, how do you respond to someone that's willing to lie, dehumanize you, commit violence? Like, it's just, that's why we all feel so wrung out at the end of this year. And this is where, the ringing out we're dividing this up so cutely in this series. We're like doing the headlines and then we're doing the cultural moments, right? But especially as you talk about the Kavanaugh hearings and the Me Too movement, I keep thinking these headlines are not beating people over the head with progressive ideology because Donald Trump was president. Progressive ideology was losing in the halls of power over and over and over again. It's culturally where people feel beat over the head. When I look at these like cultural roundups, I'm like, okay, well, this now I can see when you put this all in a list, I can see why people felt like berated is the only word I can think about.
Yeah, I would say this is the year that Me Too went corporate. When it became like the Time's Up pins at the award shows and around every corner we're having that sort of conversation, but less of a conversation, like shrunken now because it is a slogan and because it is something that is like an obligation almost of people to talk about culturally. And you can kind of see in retrospect where we lose the plot when it goes corporate.
Well, and it's like every moment had a political
gloss or something.
A political gloss. So we'll still put them in their nice little container and talk about culture, I guess. But that's what I noticed this year. I was like, oh, and it wasn't this year. I'd been noticing it for several years that the headlines are not, if not wins, certainly, advancements for conservative ideology, or at least the MAGA universe's ideology. And then the cultural are just in direct conflict with that.
So one of the big cultural moments from 2018 was that Black Panther was released in February. I loved this movie. I still think Black Panther is one of the best of the Marvel movies.
Really? Because I don't love it that much.
Oh my gosh. I think that just seeing Wakanda on the screen like that was phenomenal.
The universe of Wakanda is wonderful. I felt like I'm such a terrible person. I'm critiquing somebody who's passed away tragically, but I kind of felt like everybody except for Angela Bassett was not up to the universe. Like, and you just got to have a lot of stature to compete with the universe of Wakanda. And that's always what I felt some like push and pull against, especially, well, maybe not in the first movie, but definitely in the second movie. But
I did not like the second one either, but the first one I loved.
So that's what I'm talking about, though. Like, everything had this wash. So you have Black Panther. You have Beyonce's historic Coachella performance. You have Roseanne, and then she has all the controversies because she gets fired. And then you have, I can't believe this. I feel like Meghan Markle has been in my life for 2 decades. But this is the year they got married. And then you have all the controversies surrounding her and their marriage that's coming for us. And so I'm like looking back at all this and I'm like, dang, that's why I think we get to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour and she feels like such a breath of fresh air because we're like, dadgum, just give me something that's fun. Everything, when you look back at these years, like you couldn't have a cultural moment unless it had some sort of political impact. That's how it feels a little bit looking back at these roundups.
The other thing that jumped out at me from 2018 culturally was death. I really remember learning that Kate Spade had died.
Yeah, it was Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain really close together.
I really remember Anthony Bourdain too. Yeah, those two just stopped me in my tracks and made me think so much about the people around me. I remember like looking at people in my life differently and thinking, what's going on that I don't see? You know, who's feeling alone and I'm unaware of it, who's struggling and I don't know. I mean, that was really hard.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking. They had such devoted fan bases. Anthony Bourdain, you know, when you work in the vehicle of food, it's just different. It's just very connecting. Not everybody understands art. Not everybody likes music. Not everybody likes movies or TV. Everybody eats. And so I think in the way that he had been so open to the world, I think was what made his death so heartbreaking. You kind of just want to be like, but you love the world. You spent your time traveling around, loving the world, sharing that love with everybody else. I mean, I'm tearing up right now. That's what's so heartbreaking. And the same for Kate Spade, because her aesthetic was so joyful. It was happy. Like, that was the Kate Spade aesthetic, was this brightness and lightness. And so it was so sad to realize that was masking something. Not that Anthony Bourdain had not been honest about his struggles in the past, but with both of them, I think there was a shocking component of it that was really, really difficult.
There were 3 books that Kate Spade released that I bought in college, maybe, that were about hospitality, making people feel like a guest in your home, making days feel special, making meals feel special, writing.
I still have those 3 books on my bookshelf. Those were Nicholas's first wedding anniversary gift to me because it was paper. And so he got me the 3 Kate Spade books.
I loved those books. I read them over and over and over again. And I think about those books every time I think about her and her tragic passing this year. It was just really a shock to me.
I wonder if Justin Timberlake knew 2018 was his last hurrah.
Like his apex.
Well, it's not his apex, because I don't really think that's the peak of his fame, but it was the last time he was going to glide on that fame as the Super Bowl's halftime show, which was good. But it was the first time he'd been there. So we had to revisit all the Janet Jackson stuff from 2004. See what I mean? There's always something, man. There was nothing that was just easy, even culturally, in 2018. That's how it felt.
Yeah. Well, and that is how it feels in my body revisiting this year. Nothing was uncomplicated and everything was straining.
Now, I will say this, because there's the big cultural moments, and then there's what you discovered or what you fell in love with. And 2018 is the year I discovered Lake Street Dive. That is the year Good Kisser hit. I love that song so much. I love them so much. I've seen them in concert. That's my mad shout out to my cousin Taylor, who sent me this song. And I discovered Lake Street Dive, and that was a gift. 2018 didn't contain many gifts, although probably losing my election was absolutely a thank God for unanswered prayers kind of situation. But Good Kisser and discovering Lake Street Dive was definitely one of them.
I love that. Well, my gift shout out to 2018 was Kurt, my therapist. He was fantastic. He really, really carried me through this year, and I wish I could just go knock on his door right now and tell him that. And thank you to all of you for weathering this year with us. If you were with us in real time, man, we did it together. We pulled ourselves over the finish line, and we're so grateful for you. We'll be back with you on Tuesday for another new episode of Pantsuit Politics. Until then, have the best weekend available to you.
Pantsuit Politics is produced by Studio D Podcast Production.
Elise Knapp is our managing director. Maggie Penton is our director of community engagement.
Xander Singh is the composer of our theme music with inspiration from original work by Dante Lima.
Our show is listener supported. Special thanks to our executive producers:
Stephanie Elms,
Sasha Egolf,
the Villanueva family,
the Bookshelf on Church in Kilmarnock, Virginia,
Lindsay Sauer, Laura Martin,
Kristen Wendell,
Christina Werner,
Kristen Heidinger,
Kimberly Ludwig,
Julie Huff,
Jill Biziano,
Jessica Borrow,
Jan Feltz,
Jackie Franklin Earp,
Heather Ericacy,
the Shardy family,
Gabrielle McDonald and Wren,
Ellen Burns,
Connie Perchetti,
Christian Campbell,
Beth Loy,
Ashley Terry,
Anya Benzaka,
Amy and Derek Starr Redwine,
Carla Hegemeister,
Emily Ho,
Emily Grover Kopek,
Christy Johnson,
Sharice Winter,
Ashley Kennedy,
Mark and Rachel Redman,
the Dixon family,
Chelsea Garter, Christy Matthews, Ellen Scott and Karen Shoebottom, Jeff Davis, Kathleen Gallant, Michelle Wood, Nicole Berkles, Norma Starry, Paula Brimmer, Sarah Little, Vicki Jackman, Will and Jess Conway.